Yes. Hi. I hope everybody had a really long, restful sleep. Yesterday was really fun, and we learned a lot, and we still have a lot in store for you today. So we are going to start on time, even though people are still eating. The food's out there. Feel free to come and go. That gives our opening keynote a lot of work to do, and we like it that way. Luckily, we have good things in store, and I think you'll be riveted. So before we move on, I just want to say that I want to remind you all to go to the digital workbook to participate in sharing your thoughts there and giving yourself tasks when you get home and orienting yourself to how you're going to make this summit actionable beyond today. So make sure you check it out. Andy Plemons, who is standing up over there getting water, hello Andy, has been working really hard on it, and we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. And also Daryl Grabrick here, who's right in the front, has been working on it. Thank you, both of you. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to say we have a rapid morning. We will have a break, so you can run upstairs and do your whatever you need to do to get checked out of the hotel or grab your things. But we have a lot happening this morning. I'm going to bring up Rocco Staino, who is, as you may know, there are a lot of return summiters here, but there are new summiters here, so we assume everyone knows what Rocco does for SLJ, but I just want to make sure that this group understands. Rocco Staino contributes and has contributed to the summit from the very beginning, and he basically keeps herding the editorial staff towards focusing on the summit in the appropriate way early enough, and contributes actively throughout the planning process, and is sort of a connective tissue for us on the summit and a great contributor. So thank you, Rocco, for that. And here he is.
Good morning. I have been retired from school libraries for 6, 7 years now, and it's a joy to still be involved in the profession via School Library Journal and the summit. And thank you all for coming back or coming for your first time. In the old days, I used to bring a piece of paper for my introductions, but now I watch all these award shows, and everyone comes up with their phone, and they have all their notes. So my notes are here. So this morning, we are delighted to have the YA author Shaun David Hutchinson with us. And his books, which I have two here, We Are the Ants, The 5 Stages of Andrew Brawley, FML, Death Day Letters, and this February, At the Edge of the Universe, all deal with teen angst and tough issues such as dementia, abuse, sexuality, and suicide. What a way to start our day. 15-year-old Lauren said of We Are the Ants, it definitely made me feel things that I am not entirely sure I wanted to feel. But what better way to describe Shaun, what better way to describe what Shaun says to teens, using we all hear his own, Okay, Rocco, again, what better way to describe what Shaun says than by his own words? Depression isn't a war you win. It's a battle you fight every day. You never stop, you never get to rest. Popularity is teenage heroin. We are all Holden Caulfield at 15, but when we grow up, we all want to be Atticus Finch. Hospital walls have no memory. They would crumble under the weight of so much suffering. It's better that they forget. And my favorite, sex is biological, kissing is an art. Let's give Shaun a warm summit welcome.
I will also be using my phone if I can unlock it. This is the first time I've actually ever used my phone to do something like this, so hopefully I will not screw it up too badly. I wanted to thank you all for inviting me out here. This is a really incredible opportunity, and I appreciate all of y'all being here, enjoying your delicious breakfast while I have not eaten anything yet today. I'm so hungry. So the last time I spoke in front of an audience this large was at my high school's baccalaureate. I'm still not sure why they asked me to speak or what kind of speech they were expecting. I didn't graduate at the top of my class, and I hadn't distinguished myself in any way that I knew of. But still, they'd asked me to speak, so I figured, why not? My mother later told me that about 10 seconds after beginning my speech, she elbowed my younger brother, took the video camera away from him, and shut it off. My best friend's mother told me she spent the entire speech whispering, don't do it, under her breath, because she was convinced that I was going to use the opportunity to come out publicly to my class. High school wasn't the greatest time in my life. I was shy and painfully awkward, while at the same time I loved to argue, and I was convinced that I was always right. Much to my dismay, those traits, they're not the magic formula for attaining popularity. Add to that the confusion of being a young, closeted gay man in a southernish town, as well as my struggles with depression, and you can probably begin to imagine what kind of speech I came up with for my baccalaureate. Don't worry, I won't be giving that speech this morning. What struck me while I was preparing to speak to you all today was how similar the beginning of my baccalaureate speech was to the first chapter of my most recent book, We Are the Ants, which opens with the line, "Life is bullshit." Those weren't the exact words I said to the soon-to-be graduating class of 1996, but the sentiment was the same. The irony is that while my baccalaureate speech was essentially a big old middle finger to my peers, teachers, and nearly everyone I'd gone to school with, We Are the Ants is both a love letter and a long overdue apology. Hopefully I won't be writing a speech 20 years from today apologizing for the things I'm about to say this morning, but it's still early and I haven't had a lot of coffee, so anything's possible. Over the last couple of years, I've attended a fair number of book festivals and conferences, and I've heard a lot of really brilliant people speak. They've spoken about the importance of books as both windows and mirrors. And while I believe both of those things are true and important, I've always been more inclined to view books as bridges. Bridges to worlds where a gay nerd like me could be a hero. Bridges into the minds of characters with experiences similar to my own, and into the minds of characters with experiences completely foreign to me. Bridges to a deeper understanding both of myself and of the world around me. John Donne wrote in his Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions, Meditation 17, "All mankind is of one author and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language." In the same section, Donne later goes on to write the famous line, "No man is an island entire of itself." I've always found that sentiment wonderfully optimistic, if really naive, because in a way, each human being is an island, or for a more modern take, a skyscraper. Beginning in childhood, we lay the foundations of our skyscrapers from our experiences, the religions we're brought up in, the conditions of our families, our economic circumstances, the social atmosphere in which we live, the ideas and thoughts unique to us and to us alone. We use each and every one of those things to build our skyscrapers higher and higher into the sky, imagining that we're the only other people in the world going through the things that we're going through. Sometimes we're able to reach out to the people in the buildings nearest and most identical to our own. But more frequently, we simply lose the ability to connect to people in the skyscrapers farther away from our experiences. And sometimes, we even become prisoners within the buildings we've constructed, unable to escape that which we've built, unable to identify or empathize with others. No one is an island, except that we are. We are islands. We are skyscrapers, alone, isolated by our lives. Despite what Dunn says, we are not of one author. We are not one volume. We are infinite volumes, each our own author, doing what many well-intentioned teachers have taught us and writing only that which we know. My mom likes to tell me that I was a good kid until I turned 15. That on the last night, as her sweet 14-year-old boy, I went to bed, spun myself into a cocoon, and emerged the next morning an angry, defiant monster. I spent a few years in that skin. Much of my behavior could be attributed to the turmoil of being a teenager, and to hormones, and to my underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. But not all of it. What my mother didn't know back then was that I was also beginning my lifelong struggle with depression and dealing with confusion over my sexuality. At 16, while working for Walden Books, if any of you remember Walden Books, while working at Walden Books, I stole a Playgirl magazine. I told myself I wasn't attracted to the men inside, I just wanted to be like them. Having talked to a few gay men and teens, I discovered that my justification wasn't really that abnormal. At the time, I couldn't admit I was gay, mostly because I had zero idea what being gay actually meant. Would I have to start wearing dresses? Would I need to move to New York and take a shot at starring on Broadway? Would I be required to start wearing leather chaps and grow a handlebar mustache? It sounds ridiculous, right? But at 16, the concept of being gay was as foreign to me as the concept of being a vampire. The difference is that I could go to any library and easily find and check out a dozen books about being a vampire. I got fired from that job at Walden Books. I admitted that I'd stolen the magazine, and they had to let me go. But other than that, my life pretty much went on. I actually dated girls, joined the debate team, not that you would probably know it from this speech, and I performed with the drama club, though I never made it to Broadway. I did try, though, really hard. I didn't know, then at 17, I wrote a play. I didn't know what I was writing at the time. I just felt this overpowering, primal need to write it. One of the characters was a young man who, at the end of the final act, realizes that he's in love with his best friend, who is also a young man. The play was indisputably terrible. It was filled with angst, much like my books, apparently. It was filled with angst and riddled with cliches. But when I finished writing it, I printed it out, read it, sat on the edge of my bed, and cried. That was the first time I seriously thought about committing suicide. Not because I had finally realized I was gay, but because as I stood at the top of my skyscraper and looked out at all the buildings around me, I could see no way to reach them. By the time I slowly began coming out to my friends, my depression had become tightly intertwined with my sexuality. I wasn't depressed because I was gay, but I was depressed and I was gay. They were the binary stars around which I orbited, though from where I floated in space, they seemed to me not like two stars, but like one. I began cutting myself and taking out my frustration and anger on cement walls. My problems were further exacerbated by my lack of popularity and by my inability to do well in school because of my undiagnosed ADHD. Every time I took a razor to my skin, I built my skyscraper higher. I blocked out the windows, barricaded the doors. No one could enter, no one could leave. Depression has a way of distorting both windows and mirrors. As I tried to come to terms with my sexuality, the only stories available to me about other gay people promised that I was destined to die of AIDS, wind up beaten to death, the victim of a hate crime, or as the punchline to a joke I would never find funny. Those things were bridges in their own ways, but those bridges for me led nowhere. They beckoned me out of my tower to the vast nothingness below and tempted me to jump. And at 19, that's exactly what I did. I was living in a dorm room at Florida Atlantic University in South Florida. It was only a 45-minute drive from my house, but I'd gotten tired of commuting. I made the decision to attempt suicide during spring break. Rather than go home, I'd opted to stay in the dorm room so that I would be closer to work. I can't point to any single event during that time that made me attempt to take my life. Rather, it was the culmination of loneliness, despair, and the inability to imagine a better future for myself. I hated what I saw in the mirror, and I could see no bridges through the windows. So on March 11th, 1998 at 2 a.m., I wrote letters to my mother, to my friends. I swallowed a bottle of Tylenol, and I waited for the end. The end didn't come. Instead, I spent a week in the ICU. The thing about Tylenol overdose is that it doesn't kill you quickly. Instead, it poisons your liver slowly. I didn't realize this until about 15 hours later when I was throwing up bile in my dorm bathroom. I finally called 911, and they took me to the nearest hospital, where a nice doctor forced me to drink charcoal and a medication that smelled and tasted like dirty socks. No one expected me to survive. I'd waited too long, and the medication they'd given me isn't usually effective when administered so late. Without my knowledge, my mother had even been tested to see if she could donate part of her liver to me if it became necessary. So I have to mention that my mother is my hero, by the way. She often reads my books, joking that she pays special attention to the mothers in them to see if I'm writing about her. The secret, though, is that whenever you find strength in any of my characters, any of them, you found my mom. Just don't tell her that, because I'll never hear the end of it. Against all odds, I recovered from my suicide attempt, physically at least. I went from the ICU to a normal hospital room, and from there to a psychiatric hospital for a couple of weeks. My family and friends and the doctors and nurses in both hospitals all tried to talk to me. They all tried to reach me, but I was a skyscraper. They hadn't shared my experiences. They didn't know what I was going through. They meant well, and I recognized that, but nothing in their lives, nothing they'd gone through was similar to what I was going through. For example, my stepfather is a good man. He was a sheriff's officer for 30 years who became my father when I was 10, and he always treated me like one of his own, even though we had absolutely nothing in common. He was pretty much allergic to books, and all I wanted to do was read. Where my mother accepted my coming out with grace and understanding, my stepfather found himself less able to do so. The reason being that up to that point, his only interactions with gay men had been the ones he was arresting. To him, all gay men were drug addicts or were soliciting sex in public restrooms, and he was terrified of the thought of that life for me. I left home for a couple of years when I was 21 to live with my boyfriend at the time in Rhode Island. When I returned, my stepfather's entire outlook had changed. He was suddenly comfortable with me being gay. He was even able to make good-hearted jokes about it, which, in my family, jokes are how we show affection. If we don't joke with you, we don't like you. My dad even went to a gay pride parade. I asked my mom later what had happened, and she told me that one of his best friends at work had come out. Someone had built my father a bridge. When I was finally released from the psychiatric hospital, my depression was still pretty severe. I told the doctors all the things that they'd wanted to hear because I really just wanted to get out of there. I felt confident that I wasn't going to attempt suicide again, but I was still trapped in my skyscraper, still lonely and afraid. For me, nothing had really changed until the day it did. The movie was called Beautiful Thing. All I knew about it when I dragged my best friend to see it was that it had gay people in it. And that was good enough for me. Beautiful Thing was originally a stage play and is the story of two young men in London who begin as friends and eventually fall in love. It's set to the glorious music of the Mamas and Papas and ends with a hopeful scene of two boys dancing for all to see while Mama Cass croons "Dream a Little Dream of Me" in the background. Now, I know you're all eating, but I want you to close your eyes for a second. Everybody close your eyes? I want you to imagine teenage Shaun, filled with dread and fear because he's never seen a positive example of gay people in books or movies or even in real life. Now picture him sitting in a theater with his best friend. He's got bleached blonde hair, he's clutching the armrest of his chair, his M&Ms forgotten because he's been completely and utterly absorbed by the movie for the last 90 minutes. Projected onto the screen in front of him, two boys gaze at each other with love in their eyes and in their hearts before finally embracing in full view of their neighbors and friends and parents. It no longer matters what anyone else thinks. They hold on to each other like no one else exists and dare the world to tear them apart. And then softly, in the background, Mama Cass begins to serenade the boys as they dance. Stars shining bright above you. Night breezes seem to whisper, I love you. Birds singing in the sycamore tree. Dream a little dream of me. Say nighty-night and kiss me. Just hold me tight and tell me you'll miss me. While I'm alone and blue as can be, dream a little dream of me. Can you see it? Can you imagine it? Can you picture teenage Shaun's smile? Can you feel him blinking back the tears? You can open your eyes now. That moment, that movie, was the first time I realized happiness wasn't meant solely for other people. It was the first time that I realized that happiness could be for me. Beautiful Thing offered me a future in which I didn't end up alone or sick or dead, but rather a future that could be filled with warmth and joy and love. Beautiful Thing was my first bridge. It wasn't my last. According to the CDC, approximately 1,600 teenagers attempt suicide each day. Of that number, 12 lose their lives. 17% of students in grades 9 through 12 have reported seriously considering suicide at some point. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young adults. Queer teens, and I use the word queer to refer to the LGBTQIA community because I've always been comfortable with it, it's inclusive, and I tend to trip up over the letters. Queer teens are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. Queer teens from non-supportive families are 8 times more likely to have attempted suicide. And nearly half of all transgender teens have reported wanting to take their own lives. Think about those statistics for a second. They scare the hell out of me. And I really hope they scare the hell out of you and anyone else who hears them. I wasn't fully prepared for the emails I'd receive from teens when I published We Are the Ants. After the publication of my 3rd book, which was my first with a gay narrator, I'd started getting sporadic letters from teens grateful for a book with a hero in it like them. But it was ants that opened the floodgates. I've received letters with some of the most amazing and heartbreaking stories imaginable. Stories that have gutted me, and stories that have made me laugh until I cried, and stories that have left me speechless, staring at my computer screen. They all have one thing in common. It's how excited they are to have found a book in which they could see themselves. A book with a gay teen who doesn't hate himself for being gay, where sexuality isn't even a plot point. A reader once pointed out to me that the word gay almost never even comes up in We Are the Ants, despite Henry being gay. So I did a word search, and I discovered that bacon actually occurs more frequently than the word gay. And it wasn't because I was avoiding the word, but simply because it's a part of who Henry is. I didn't need to endlessly point it out. He was living it. It's just him. Also, I really like bacon. Henry's boyfriend doesn't take his own life prior to the beginning of the story because he's gay, but because he suffers from depression. Henry isn't bullied because he's gay, but because he tells people he's an alien abductee. Teens are grateful that I've shown the effects of Jesse's suicide, or shown the effects Jesse's suicide had on his family and friends. Seeing Henry battle mental illness and come out the other side offers them hope. When I began my writing career in earnest, I never expected I'd be writing so passionately about mental illness and the problems faced by queer teens. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that this is where I've ended up, and I'm glad that my journey has brought me here, though I'm also sad that it's still necessary. We Are the Ants deals with how we move on after someone we love has taken their life. At the beginning of the story, Henry Denton is abducted by aliens and given the choice to press a button and save the world, or not press it and let the world end. To most people, this seems like a pretty straightforward decision. They press the button, right? Obviously. But there are teens out there for whom the decision is not so clear-cut. They're trapped in their skyscrapers, staring out the windows from the topmost floor, and they can't see any other way to reach the buildings around them. In my next book, At the Edge of the Universe, Oswald Pinkerton is a boy who thinks the universe is shrinking. He believes the world is collapsing all the way down to the small town in which he lives. The people he knows and loves are all disappearing, and his greatest fear is that he'll eventually wind up alone. He meets a boy named Calvin who's suffering from the effects of sexual assault and seeks relief in self-harm. I don't write easy books. I have never written a book with a clear-cut hero or villain. You're meant to hate Henry a little and love him a lot and be frustrated by him constantly. You're meant to roll your eyes at Ozzy's self-centeredness. At the Edge of the Universe was originally titled Center of the Universe for a reason. Because Ozzy spends a large chunk of the book as a selfish jerk. He's so caught up in his own problems that he can't see that others are suffering around him. My books aren't easy, because life isn't easy, because building bridges isn't easy. But I write them so that the kids who are going through what Henry and Ozzy and teenage me went through can see themselves. I write them so that the teens who have never suffered from depression or thought about hurting themselves or don't know what it's like to be gay or lonely or an outsider can see and empathize with what other people are going through. A few readers, mostly adults, are turned off by the darkness in my books. They want happy books with clear-cut messages of hope and redemption. They want books that shout to teens that it gets better. But it's not enough to just tell teens it gets better. I want to show them what it looks like when it's bad, when it's at the worst, and then show them how it gets better so that those who have never been to those dark places can empathize with those who have, and so that those who are living in those dark places now can see themselves, envision a path out, and know that they're not alone. And though my books aren't easy, they offer the hope I found the first time I sat in the theater watching Beautiful Thing and listening to Mama Cass. The entire core of my philosophy can be summed up by one scene from We Are the Ants. Henry spends much of the book asking his family and friends if they would push the button and save the world. He listens to all of their answers, and everybody gives a different answer. But near the end, Henry is confronted by Jesse's mother. Jesse's mother is the mother of his ex-boyfriend who had committed suicide. He's confronted by her for breaking into her house. And right before she leaves, he asks her that same question. If you had the chance to save the world, would you? Jesse's mother says she would. And Henry, confused, because if anyone at all has a reason not to press the button, it's Jesse's mother. So he asks her why. Because, she says, Jesse believed the world wasn't worth living in, and I refused to prove him right. When I said earlier that We Are the Ants was both a love letter and a long overdue apology, I meant that it was a love letter to the teen readers to let them know that we see them, to let them know that they are not alone, to offer them a way out of their skyscrapers they think they're trapped in. And it's an apology for not accepting the help my friends and family offered me when I was a teenager myself. We Are the Ants is a bridge. At the Edge of the Universe is a bridge. Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, and All-American Boys, and Cracked Up to Be, and Willful Machines, and Frontlines, and The Hate You Give, and Challenger Deep, they are all bridges. Some are like Beautiful Thing was for me, a bridge to a life I never thought I deserved or could lead. A bridge that showed me that the world wasn't the dark, lonely place I'd so long imagined it to be. Other books are bridges to places and ideas outside of our own experiences. Jason Reynolds builds bridges that help me understand what it's like to be a young black man. Courtney Summers builds bridges that help me understand what it's like to be a teenage girl. And though I, a white man, will never truly comprehend the fullness of those experiences, their books offer me the opportunity to try. Books invite us to leave our skyscrapers and step into their worlds. They say, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is what my life is like. And they bring us closer to and help us understand one another. As librarians and teachers and professionals involved with teens, you are the caretakers of those bridges. You are the guides. You are the ones who have the opportunity to see the teens who are struggling and offer them a way out of their skyscrapers, to hand them a book and say, "You're not alone." It only took one movie to completely change my life, and you can do the same with one book. I wonder what my life might have been like if a teacher in high school had given me Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. I wonder if slipping into Simon's world and reading his happy ending would have given me the ability to imagine my own happy ending. I wonder if reading All the Bright Places or The Memory of Light would have helped me understand my own struggles with mental illness and given me the courage to seek the help that I desperately needed. I don't just write the books that I want to read. I write the books teenage Shaun needed to read. I write them in the hopes that there are other kids out there who need to read them. I know that publishers are concerned with sales numbers, and I certainly enjoy making money. But honestly, I don't care whether my books sell 10,000 copies or just 10, so long as the teens that need them are able to find them. And authors like me depend on people like you to help those teens find them. The teens depend on you. Our teenage years are so important because the foundation of much of the worldview we possess as adults is built when we're teens. Without the bridges great books can provide, we risk becoming trapped and isolated in our skyscrapers. Regardless of what John Donne said, we are islands, but that doesn't mean we have to live on those islands alone. I read an article recently about a library system serving the Oklahoma City area that keeps books with queer themes in a special section that's required to be a minimum of 5 feet off the ground, ostensibly so that younger children can't reach those books. I remember after I came out, haunting Barnes & Noble for books with gay themes and having to sneak around the stacks to the gay and lesbian literature section, which actually consisted of a single shelf filled mostly with nonfiction books and erotica anthologies. I was looking to see if there were any books with characters in it who were like me. I never found any. It says a lot about the time in which I grew up that I needed to write a play with a gay character in it just so that I could see myself on the page. What if I hadn't been a writer? What if I'd been a football player, or a surfer, or a computer whiz? How would I have created the thing that I needed to help me understand and deal with what I was going through? Not every kid has that opportunity. Today's teens still have a lot more options than I did when I was a teen. It's not ideal, but it's what they have. In addition to letters from teen readers, I also receive emails from adults expressing that they wish they'd had books like mine when they were growing up, which is why stories like that of the library system in Oklahoma City make me so angry. Books can save lives. And who are we to keep them from the teens that need them? We risk doing irreparable harm to the very people we're supposed to be helping by holding those books hostage, by putting them on a restricted shelf and spreading the message that the people and ideas in those books are dirty and immoral and something to be ashamed of. I don't know how anybody can read a book like Alex Gino's George and not understand how much a young adult struggling with their gender identity could need a book like that. And Alex is one of the sweetest, most compassionate human beings I've ever met. And George is the kind of book that could save a life. Why would we ever deny a kid in need the chance to envision their own happy future? Maybe that all sounds like hyperbole. But a movie did save my life. I have an inbox full of emails from teens telling me We Are the Ants saved their lives. I've spoken to authors like Bill Konigsberg, Hannah Moskowitz, Jennifer Niven, and Andrew Smith, who have heard similar stories from teens. Their books have been bridges. Their books have saved lives. My battle with depression began in my teens, and it's something I've continued to struggle with. I had a second major depressive episode when I was in my mid-20s. I didn't attempt suicide again, but I came pretty close. Books saved me. Not any one book in particular. All of them. When I needed to escape the skyscraper I felt trapped in, books were my bridges to the outside world. The last couple of months have also been particularly difficult for me. A relationship I'd been in for 6 years ended, and there were nights where I crawled into bed and wondered if it might not be easier if I never woke up. This time it was a particular book that saved me. But not just the book, the person who wrote it. Right before I published my first book, The Death Day Letter, my agent at the time suggested I read a book called Be More Chill. He said the humor and weirdness of it reminded him of my own work, and he thought it would be good for me to see what else was being written in the space that I wanted to write in. That book was by an author named Ned Vizzini. I devoured Be More Chill and went on to discover it's kind of a funny story. That book felt very personal to me. It felt like the kind of book I could have written. And in a way, it helped shape the kind of books that I eventually did decide to write. I did some research about Ned Vizzini and learned that It's Kind of a Funny Story was sort of autobiographical. Once again, I saw myself in a book, but not just in a book, in the author. Vizzini was like me. He was fighting some of the same battles that I was fighting, and he was writing books just like I wanted to do. Just like when I sat in the theater and watched Beautiful Thing, I read Vizzini's books, and I read about him, and I saw a path for myself that I'd never before dreamed possible. In 2013, Ned Vizzini took his own life. I never had the opportunity to meet or speak to him, but I took his death very personally. He'd been a role model of mine, someone whose life and work had been a bridge for me. That he'd lost his battle with depression hit right to the very core of everything I feared. After my breakup, I spent a lot of time building Star Wars Lego sets and watching Gilmore Girls. Those didn't quite work. I started thinking about Ned Vizzini again. I hadn't picked up It's Kind of a Funny Story in years, so I pulled it off my shelf and I began to read. The first line is, "It's so hard to talk when you want to kill yourself." I knew exactly what he meant. But we have to talk. We have to talk and talk and talk and keep talking and keep building bridges. It's why I write the books I do. It's the only reason for me that matters. I wrote the line, "Life is bullshit," for every teen who's ever wondered about their place in the universe. I wrote We Are the Ants to show readers that we may not matter to the universe, but that they matter to each other and they matter to me. I wrote it to tell them that we are the ants and we must keep marching on. Though we lost an amazing human being, Ned Vizzini is still talking. His books are still bridges. Rereading It's Kind of a Funny Story helped me gain perspective again. It was a way out of my skyscraper, a bridge to a beautiful life. I'm still battling depression. I'm still fighting. But his book helped me see more clearly exactly why I keep fighting and what I'm fighting for. And in the same way that I'd written We Are the Ants as a love letter to everyone who struggles and fights, I felt kind of like Ned Vizzini had written It's Kind of a Funny Story as a love letter to me. We are islands. We are skyscrapers. It's just human nature. But books are bridges that can help us understand ourselves. They can help us understand and reach other people. Through books, we don't ever have to be alone. And I spoke earlier about the library system in Oklahoma City, and I actually have a few minutes extra, so I'm going to throw in a little story because my speech came up a few minutes short. I talk a little fast. I didn't account for that. So I spoke a little bit about the library system in Oklahoma City. And I know that speaking about that, one of the things when speaking to librarians is that they're not always in control of the regulations and rules that get passed. Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's legislators. They're the ones who make those rules and pass those laws. So I want to tell you a story about a librarian that was at a school. I was 5th grade to 8th grade. I went to a school called St. Clair's. It was a Catholic school. And I was a voracious reader. I had read everything. And so I had read my way through every single book in that library. And the librarian there struggled to keep up with recommending books for me. And then all of a sudden, she started handing me Dune. She started handing me books by Robin McKinley. She started handing me all of these different books. And I never really thought about it. I never really thought like, oh, she's giving me Stephen King. This is the coolest library ever, Where were these books being shelved, I was not a very smart kid. And I didn't realize this until I graduated in 8th grade and I left that school. Those weren't library books. Those were her books. Those were the books that she brought from her own personal stash to give to me, at risk of her own job, because this was a Catholic school. And if my mom hadn't been awesome, and I had gone and said, "Mom, she's giving me books about clowns," she could have gotten fired from that job. And I know that not every librarian can do that. It was a very, very special librarian at that school, and I recognize that now. I have a problem with those types of rules and regulations, because I don't think that it is your jobs to tell kids what they can and can't read. So my mom, we grew up kind of poor. I didn't realize that breakfast for dinner wasn't like this really cool special thing that everyone else did. I didn't realize at the time that we did that because that's all my mom could afford at the time. But the one thing, I never had cool shoes. When I was going through a growth spurt, my mom bought me girls' tennis shoes because they were cheaper. There was always money for books. Always. She always made sure that we had money for books. And she always read the things that I was reading. Even when she thought, okay, I don't know, this may not be the best thing for you, she read it and she let me read it. I remember there was a trip we took, and it was actually the last time I was in DC. We took a train trip, and I got a book called The Devil's Cat. And it was as bad as it sounds. And I learned some things that a 10-year-old boy should not be learning. But what was cool about that was that I talked to my mom about those things, and she explained them to me. And so I never felt as if I was, being scarred by these things I was reading. And so when I hear stories about, the Oklahoma City Library, I think, that's not the librarian's job, that's the parent's job. And I am all for the rights of parents to dictate what their children read, just not what other children can read. So I would challenge each and every one of you to help the teens you work with, directly or indirectly, find those bridges they desperately need. Because you never know. The kid you give a book to today could be standing up here tomorrow telling you the story of how it saved their life. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, we don't have time for Q&A.
Oh, that's
so
okay.
we'll move on. But thank you so much. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Shaun. That was incredible. Thank you.